The final step is to make a plan. Once you know how bad it is, once you understand the situation you're in, once you understand what the worst that could happen, the third step and the final step is to make a plan, to figure out a way to deal with the situation and hopefully lead to a point in the future where you're debt-free. If that's not possible, then to lead to a point in the future where the basic needs for housing and shelter and warmth and taking care of your children are met, even if you're under the obligation of judgments against you. The first step in that is like the first step in the first is to avoid scams, or one of the primary steps in the first step, avoid scams. Just there are so many people who want to prey on the vulnerable state that a person who owes money is in. Because a person who owes money in our culture often feels guilt, they're easy prey. And this stuff is confusing. It is a combination of current law and ancient law that's all mashed together. So it isn't self-explanatory, and it's easy for a person to kind of turn to a white knight who may be able to help them. And unfortunately, most of the white knights that will contact you, whether through radio or TV advertising or through direct solicitation, are going to be someone who just wants to take a little bit of the money that you have left. The second step is, I would suggest, is to investigate bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is not the solution for everyone, but it is an extremely powerful tool that Congress has designed for the sole purpose of allowing our economy to function and allowing people who find themselves in overwhelming debt to make a fresh start. It's a public, the bankruptcy code is there for a reason. Our economy is built on credit. It's built on risk-taking. And if individuals who took a chance, who made a bet that turned out to be wrong, found themselves in an absolutely hopeless situation, our entire economy could scream to a halt. Bankruptcy is a necessary tool, and it's a tool that's put in there that allows our debt-based and credit-based society to function. I think my advice would be for anyone who's facing significant debt should at least understand bankruptcy, understand it, whether it's an option for them, and understand what it would mean to them and for their assets and for their family and for their debts if they chose to go through it. It isn't the right solution for everyone, but because it's such a powerful tool, it's something that needs to be understood and needs to be taken very seriously. Maine is a state that uses state law exemptions for bankruptcy. So the same exemptions that you'll learn about in preparing for a disclosure, your primary residence exemption, your income exemptions, your auto exemption, the tools of the trade exemptions, apply in general in bankruptcy, although it's a little bit more complex than I'm making it out to be. And probably I should go directly into a short explanation of the process, just so you have a sense of what to expect in most bankruptcies. But I'll probably leave that for a much further discussion for an expert. Bankruptcy law is nothing to dabble in. It's like tax law or another specialized field of federal law. And I'll be free, I do not practice in bankruptcy, although I do a decent amount of debt defense in my practice. But I'll give a brief explanation of bankruptcy, and I would always suggest that if you're curious, to make an appointment for a consultation with a bankruptcy attorney. It is very common in the field for the initial consultation to be free, although I would advise you to check with the attorney's office to be sure that that is true in the case of the attorney you called. But you really need to speak to an expert, let them know your situation, and they can give you some advice on whether bankruptcy makes sense for you. The process for Chapter 7, which is the bankruptcy that most individuals go through, is relatively simple. It's about a 4-month process total from the time of filing to discharge, unless there are some complications that arise in the case. Most of the work involved is in preparing the initial petition, which is a detailed filing with the court that explains most of the details of your financial life for the last few months. Well, actually, most of them for the last few years, and almost all of them for the last few months. That's part of the trade in bankruptcy. You may have a discharge and be able to have a fresh start free of your debts, but one of the requirements is absolute transparency and honesty, and laying out your situation to the court and to the debtors. After the petition is filed, there'll be an automatic stay, which means that collection attempts need to stop against you, or it's a violation of federal law. So it does give you some peace and quiet and some time to think. Essentially, the process forces all of the creditors to use the federal court process, the bankruptcy process, for relief and not try to go outside of it. Although, again, it's a complex field of law, and some creditors, such as banks who may own a mortgage, companies that have financed a car, may be able to get leave from the bankruptcy court to try to collect in other ways. The cost. Bankruptcy is not cheap, but for the amount of, for such a powerful tool, in certain circumstances, the cost can be very manageable. There is no set, the fees are set. It's roughly $400 in filing fees for the court and the necessary credit counseling sessions. That can vary slightly, but it's a good rule of thumb. The industry standard in Maine, well, I'm not sure if there is an industry standard. Most of the fees that I've seen are between $1,200 for the lawyer to $1,800. Many seem to center around $1,500 for a lawyer doing a standard Chapter 7 for an individual or a married couple. But, again, it's something to clarify with the lawyer, and there may be some regional variation there. But as a good rule of thumb, it's safe to expect a Chapter 7 bankruptcy that you're paying for, full cost, to go between $1,800 and maybe $2,200 in total cost, most of which will have to be paid up front, or actually all of which will need to be paid up front, or almost all of which will need to be paid up front. Although several attorneys in our region of the state do allow payment plans, in that they will not file until the full fee is paid, but they will do some initial work and prepare the petition while the client is making payments to come up to the total fee. Bankruptcy may not be the solution for your situation. It's possible that your level of debt is low enough that the cost of bankruptcy may not be a wise use of resources when those resources could settle the outstanding debt. It's also possible that the type of debt that you have is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Many tax debts, many student loan debts, many child support debts are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. And depending on what your actual debt looks like, bankruptcy may not be the solution for you. But it's worth investigation. And even if you choose not to do it now, it's good to know that if something else would go wrong, or if some other plan that's in place would not work out, to know that it's there as a safety net. And finally, I return to the idea of the budget. And if you find that you can service your current debts through economizing, through prioritizing high-interest credit cards, perhaps through consolidating debt, that, if possible, would of course be a great solution. If it's not possible, then it's important to know what defenses you have in any lawsuits that might come, and any defenses that you may be able to use in a disclosure process, and to understand bankruptcy.